Okay, everybody, welcome to the September 5th, 2023 Joint Long Range Planning Commission Committee hybrid meeting on the Langston Boulevard update. We are holding a hybrid meeting which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia for the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted on July 7, 2022. Members of the Planning Commission are participating in person as well as remotely. If there are members of the Planning Commission who are participating by phone only, please let us know. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically by using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the LRPC web pages, the county's events calendar, and the email notifications sent to LRPC email subscribers. Additionally, there's a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our planning commissioners joining virtually if anyone loses internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you are called upon. Turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed. I will address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a moment. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active for two purposes: for participants who need technical assistance and for attendees who pose brief clarifying questions to the larger audience. While these will be monitored, they will not be formally acknowledged. Staff may address these comments as appropriate. The Teams chat should not be used for discussion or any inappropriate statements. Those who are planning to provide public comment will still need to do so at the end of this meeting, as the chat will not serve as that opportunity. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public testimony periods. Also, just by way of note, for everyone who's in the room, please be reminded to speak up slowly and clearly and to point to the microphone to allow virtual participants to hear you. In addition, if you'd like to share your screen, please request permission from the LRPC chair, who happens to be me tonight, prior to doing so. Some additional notes for planning commissioners. If commissioners participating virtually wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the course of the meeting, please turn your video feed on and raise your virtual hand in Teams. I, as well as staff, monitor the video feeds that are on as an indicator for those of you who would like to speak. Some additional notes for our members of the public who would like to provide feedback and comment. Unlike the Planning Commission's regular meetings, the LPRC, I've been saying this wrong the whole time. This one says LPRC. Yeah. Okay, you're welcome. That's what we've been separated. The LRPC agenda items are not public hearings. Therefore, public comment is at the LRPC chair's discretion after the committee discussion has concluded. You will be called on at the end of the meeting to speak on each of tonight's agenda items. The speaking time allotted will depend on the number of speakers we have this evening. We were capping it at 2 minutes tonight. I will call for speakers at the end of the meeting, and I will ask staff to let me know if we have virtual attendees who would like to provide comment. Staff will acknowledge speakers in the Teams chat. Please indicate in the chat if you'd like to provide comment, and your name will be added to our list of speakers. Members of the public attending virtually will speak first, followed by in-person attendees. When virtual attendees are called upon to speak, you must unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that's located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. You will be muted when your time has concluded. As an alternative, public comment is available and may be provided on the public comment form posted on the LRPC webpage. And of course, public comment can always be received by email. Lastly, this is a public forum. Tonight's meeting will be recorded and posted on the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. Again, my name is Devanshi Patel. I actually never said my name is Devanshi Patel. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission and chairing tonight's meeting. I will go around the room so that we can introduce everyone else.
Jim Lytelme, member of the Planning Commission.
Natasha Alfonso Hamid, I'm the project manager for the Langston Boulevard Planning Study.
Nia Bagley, Planning Commission.
Karen Cavada, Planning Commission.
Emily Garrett, Planning Staff.
Leah Sarli, Planning Commission.
Eric Brickey, Planning Commission.
Peter Robertson, Planning Commission.
John McIntyre, Climate Change, Energy and Environment Commission.
Lily Brown, with the planning commission.
Jennifer Smith, Planning Staff.
And then we can just go around the room this way.
Dave Liebson, with the Chair of the Alliance for Housing Solutions.
Jean Hensroth, I'm president of Leeway Overley Civic Association.
Rob Swash, I'm also with Leeway Overlay.
Ginger Brown, the executive director of the Boulevard Alliance.
Zach Williams, the land use attorney with Venable.
Tip Hansen, resident of Arlington.
Daniel Broussard, member of the Voice. Matt Longer, land use attorney. Paul Holland, I'm the chair of the Plan Langston Boulevard Community Forum.
Sandy Chesron, vice chair, Plan Langston Boulevard Community Forum and president, Waverly Hills.
Wonderful. So I just want to let everybody know that we have I'm sorry, online. Thank you. We have online. Any planning commissioners? Daniel? Oh, Daniel Weir's coming in. Well, Daniel Weir is part of the planning commission. He's online. Are there any other planning commissioners online? And then any other commissions?
Hello, can I be heard?
Are you on any of our commissions?
No, I'm not, but I'm on the phone. I'm calling, I'm just doing audio, and I didn't know at what point I should identify myself.
Okay, are you a member of the public wishing to provide public comment?
Yes, I'm a member of the public. I live in Lion Village, and my name is Claire Jacobson.
Okay, wonderful. Ms. Jacobson, we'll put your name on the list for public comment.
Thank you.
Okay. And I think that's everybody from the commissions. Okay, wonderful. So now we have a quorum for us to be able to hold this meeting today. And I will now turn it over to Natasha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I believe Ryan is going to share the slides. So he'll pull them up momentarily. But joining me tonight are thank you, Ryan, of staff team members, not only from CPHD, which we were introduced a minute ago, but also from DPR for parks and DES for transportation and stormwater, since those are the topics today. And then Ryan Bauma, who is the project manager for ACOM and also the planning consultant. He's going to help navigate the slides today. So today is part 2 of the presentation on the Langston Boulevard area plan, specifically the draft that was released in June of this year. So if you recall the presentation in July, and the discussion was really focused on 6 of the planning elements, which were related to the built environment. And those included land use, housing, economic vitality, public facilities and schools, building form and height, and historic and cultural resources. So tonight, we're going to focus on the 3 remaining planning elements, which are related to the public realm. Again, those are public spaces, transportation, and sustainability. So like last time, what we're going to do is I'll provide a very brief overview of the policies and the recommendations for each of those elements to tee up the committee discussion, and then we'll just break right into the discussion. And then once we're done with those 3 elements, if there's time left, we can certainly answer any remaining questions on any of the topics that we've covered in the last meeting and this meeting.
Thank you.
Good. Okay. All right. So next slide. I think one back, Ryan. Sorry. Perfect. So throughout the public process, the transportation recommendations in the plan have really been centered or guided around this transportation goal, which is to transform the corridor into Main Street, connecting the surrounding neighborhoods and the areas of the corridor and increasing transit use. So the goal really helped to inform the transportation policies and the recommendations that are currently in the plan. And the policies focus on creating complete streets that accommodate all modes of travel adequately and safely, expanding the street, pedestrian, and bicycle networks, increasing safety by improving intersections and crossings along Langston Boulevard, as well as reducing driveways to minimize conflict points between all modes of travel, enhancing design and resilience of streetscapes through biophilic design, green infrastructure, and undergrounding of utilities, enhancing transit service, expanding the network, and improving the experience for all transit users, accommodating last mile mobility option and as well as electric vehicle charging, and lastly but not least, promoting different parking strategies along the corridor. So next slide. So the plan includes recommendations for expanding the street grid in all neighborhood areas along the corridor, particularly near intersections to allow for access to new development to be consolidated. This really helps again to reduce the driveways along Langston Boulevard and other major streets to improve that safety for all modes of travel, for bicyclists, pedestrians, vehicles, etc. So in response to the community feedback that we received in the PCP, this new version or the draft plan also identifies additional intersections for future study in all of the neighborhood areas. So as you can see here on the map for Area 2, there are a few new streets that are proposed near the Harrison intersection and the Langston Brown Community Center. Additionally, there are 3 new intersections that have been identified for future study in this particular area. So next slide. The plan also includes recommendations for bicycle facilities in all neighborhood areas. You may recall in the PCP, the mobility maps were depicted both the street network as well as the bike network into one map. So the plan now actually separates the two into 2 separate maps. So for the bike network, we're clarifying or making it more clear what the types of bike facilities are in each of the areas, the location, to make sure that it's clear on the plan. So for Area 2, as you see here on the map, the proposed bike facilities per se did not change in the draft plan. As you will see, the segment of Langston Boulevard from North Sycamore to North Lexington has very limited right-of-way, and it's not planned for redevelopment. So in that area, we're not necessarily proposing any bicycle facilities, or we're not recommending any. However, east of Lexington, where the right-of-way is also similarly limited, but there is an opportunity for redevelopment because there are recommendations for land uses. In that area, we think that by incentivizing mixed use, there's a possibility of creating the bicycle facilities as properties redevelop over time. So in that segment specifically, the plan, as you can see here in the sections, recommend enhanced bicycle lanes or protected bicycle lanes. However, it also recognizes that additional right-of-way is needed in this particular segment of the corridor. And this may be difficult to acquire over time, and it'll happen in a very fragmented way. So the second option that you see on the right provides an alternative sort of streetscape design that allows for a wider sidewalk that can accommodate both pedestrians and slow bicycle and scooter traffic comfortably, but not necessarily on the road. So it's really working within the limited right-of-way. And then generally between Sycamore and Cameron on the south side of Langston Boulevard, and between Sycamore and Glebe on the north side of Langston, in this particular, part of the corridor, we think that it's going to be important to establish a parallel route for bicycle facilities along 26th and 22nd. And we've talked through a number of ideas for what that could look like in the PCP. At least until we can create a very cohesive route along Langston Boulevard, and it'll always continue to be a very convenient route for people that don't necessarily want to travel along the corridor. So next slide. So in Area 3, there are 6 additional intersections that were identified in the draft plan for future study. In this area, the most critical part of the neighborhood that needs the expansion of the street grid is really east of North Woodstock Street. In this area, the plan recommends new east-west streets to really connect not only the existing multifamily, but the planned multifamily in the future, where there are really large existing blocks that just need to be broken up to make it more walkable. We also believe that by creating these new sort of parallel roads, we can actually minimize the local traffic, both along Langston as well as Cherry Hill Road. Then west of Woodrow, the plan recommends to study whether a segment of Cherry Hill Road can be closed to create a future plaza, in the public plaza in the future. Obviously, the closure of the road would require not only coordination with the state and all of that, but additional analysis to make sure that it's feasible and that it makes sense from a safety perspective. And it needs to be coordinated as well with whatever improvements we do to the intersection of Langston and Old Dominion. So it's all pretty much related. So next slide. So in terms of the bicycle facilities, there were a few changes that were made in Area 3. On Langston Boulevard, the PCP had recommended a 2-way sort of shared use path on the south, on one side of the road. I believe it was the north side. The plan now recommends enhanced facilities on both sides, which is always better because it helps distribute the flow of the bikes on both sides of the road. And I'll show you that in the next slide, but for, what you can see here is that for North Taylor Street, the PCP did not recommend a bicycle facility there, and the plan is now showing Sharrows. For 20th Road, the PCP also did not recommend any bicycle facilities, but the plan is now recommending an off-street trail as part of the greenway for that corridor. So next slide. So, and these are the cross sections for Langston Boulevard. You know, throughout Area 3, the corridor itself, not only the land uses, the topography, but also the right-of-way changes significantly in Area 3. So for this segment of the corridor, there are 4 cross sections, really trying to accommodate for the different land uses and potential for redevelopment, as well as, again, the existing right-of-way. All of the cross sections include dedicated space for bicycles. However, from North Glebe to Lorcum Lane, which are the first 2 sort of cross sections on the left side, there is enough development potential there to, you know, to try to expand the right of way and provide separated bicycle facilities, meaning protected, the kind of landscape strip that buffers the bicyclists from the travel lane. Whereas between Lorcum and Military, that's not really the case. We've got topography issues. We also have very limited potential redevelopment in that area. And so the only potential there is really to reallocate the space that we do have between the curbs and accommodate dedicated bicycle facilities. So basically striping with some kind of buffer or vertical delineators to visually separate the space for drivers and bicyclists. So next slide. In Area 5 West, the plan identifies 7 additional intersections. Again, these are all based on community feedback. We listened, you know, we heard where people were concerned about safety. In Area 5 West, the most critical spot for expansion of the street grid is really east of Spout Run in North Highlands, just north of Langston Boulevard. This is really to support the future multifamily infill and redevelopment that we foresee happening in that area, which we know is important because of its proximity to transit, to the metro. And really, again, to try to improve the access and circulation through the neighborhood. If you just take one drive down any one of those roads, you'll realize that you can't connect from east to west without going on to Langston. So this will help with that. Next slide. So in Area 5 West, there is sufficient right-of-way to provide the enhanced bicycle facilities without having to rely on redevelopment to make that happen. The conversion of the cross-section, you know, from a 6-lane to 4 lanes would include enhanced bicycle lanes, so really protected with large buffers, wider sidewalks. And of course, all of that would require coordination and approval with VDOT. It's not something that we can just do automatically. In the PCP, the cross-section for this segment of Langston showed a 2-way shared use path on the north side. You will see now that in the plan, we're proposing enhanced bicycle lanes on both sides, which again helps to distribute, make it more accessible for, you know, for east and west traffic or bicycle travel along Langston. Next slide. So Area 5 East, the PCP didn't really identify any intersections for further study. However, we did hear from the community through our recent engagement, and particularly with the residents of Palisades and others like Park Georgetown and so forth, the need to identify both North Quinn and North Oak Streets as important intersections for future studies. So we will be doing that in the next draft of the plan. And then next slide, in terms of the bicycle network, there weren't really any changes that were proposed from the PCP to the draft plan that you have in front of you. So the last slide, next slide, so we can start the conversation on with the committee is really on the design guidelines for the public realm. And those are intended to really support, again, the transportation policies in the plan. They provide recommendations for, you know, not only enhancing connectivity, but for designing complete streets, designing alleys, greenways, for consolidating access points and driveways so we can make it safer, and really for creating welcoming streetscapes. So without getting into a whole lot of details, there's a lot of material on that particular subject, but I open it up to the committee.
Thank you so much. So just like, as Natasha said, the last time what we did is we broke up each one of these topics and then we said, we're just gonna have a discussion real time on the presentation.
Yeah.
So, I have a question. I was just whispering to my colleague here. I drive down up and down Langston Boulevard every day. Today was a particularly scary day on Langston, right? I think every day is a particularly scary day, but today was a uniquely particularly scary day. Both ways. There was, I was talking to a police officer friend this morning. Traffic was really, really awful. Probably because after long holiday and the kids are coming back. I mean, we're probably not ready for everything. But one of the things that I was thinking about on my way home today, there was a bicycle like kind of moving through the street, and there's not any real place for a bicycle to go other than on the street on bicycle, right? But this particular bicyclist was, in and out of traffic and nearly got hit by several people. And I was looking at the topography in anticipation of today to think about what are some of the ways that we could protect that bicycle and also protect everybody else, right? I mean, we need to make sure everybody's walking in cars, everybody's safe. Is there anything in this plan that would preclude where some places I think on Langston could benefit from like what they do in DC, where they create the bike lanes right in the middle. So you take out the median, but the bike lanes are protected in the middle with those like things, those.
The vertical delineation.
Yes, thank you. I know it's not always our best option, right? But it works really well on some stretches like Pennsylvania Avenue. It works really well on spaces like that. And then I know in some conversations, we're talking about lowering speed limits and is there anything in this plan that would prohibit us from doing that? Because I specifically think about that Cherrydale area where we start winding a little bit.
Yeah.
I know it might require an assessment between like the removal of trees, and Jim was bringing up that important point as well. But is there some way we can balance all of this where it may not necessarily be, there's a lot of traffic on this road, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, obviously planning out 10 years in advance, how many cars we're going to take off the road.
Right.
But right now, and even in the next 5 years, what can we be thinking about?
Sure. To not anticipate, I don't know that we can anticipate every possible option, but I know the plan provides flexibility for adaptation if the current options that we have today, 5 years from now, need to be tweaked.
Right.
So I'll let Ryan or Kristen jump in and talk specifically about your question about the sort of doing with the DC model, which allows for the bicycle facilities to be in the center of the road. The only response I'll have to that one in particular is, regardless of where we put the bikes, the right of way is narrow.
Right.
So whether we put it in the middle or on the sides, we're still gonna need to acquire right of way or
100%.
wait for the redevelopment to happen for it to happen, except for the area east of Spout Run, where
Right.
we've got the space.
Right.
So I don't know if Kristen is on, and maybe she can jump in.
Yeah, so I'm happy to address this question. DC is actually very unique, but they're one of the few jurisdictions that has that center running bike lane. Pennsylvania Avenue has it because of the significant amount of right-of-way that exists there. And then Irving Street is the other location in the city that also has it because of the significant right-of-way. And because there aren't left turn lanes, and that's where I'm going to kind of answer your question in a two-part answer. The plan really does look at what our best recommendation for how to accommodate cyclists in the corridor is, which is on directional bike lanes behind the curb, if possible, as we continue to redevelop and reappoint the right-of-way along Langston. Center running turn lanes are really hard to accommodate because a lot of the times, and especially in a corridor like Langston, you're going to need to continue to have left turn lanes at some of these major intersections. And when you have that, you also need space for cyclists to continue through, which means you not only need the room for the center running turn lane, but also for the left turn lanes. You have a lot of complex signaling happening. So I used to bike to work along Pennsylvania Avenue probably for 3 or 4 years. So have a very intimate understanding. But you get stopped a lot for those left turns. It works because a lot of times the signal progression along Pennsylvania Avenue works. But for a corridor like Langston, where we already have a really constrained right-of-way that we're trying to eke out that space to protect cyclists along the corridor, the center running lanes just aren't our best option. in 10 years, if we're looking at kind of what makes sense then, and center running bike lanes make sense based on the conditions and context then, it's not something this plan says absolutely no to in the long run. It's just not the recommendation that staff has come up with is how we think we can most successfully and safely incorporate protected bike facilities into the corridor.
Yeah, I mean, I think about on Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania and 7th, right? Like they have dedicated turn signals for the bike lane for, the left turn lane. And when you first come upon it, it's kind of like, oh, what's happening? I don't know which one is, I fully understand that, but I just want to make sure, I just want to make sure it's not being precluded as an option, especially if it could be an interim solution up front with a plan to. It's not like that specific stretch of the road, it just doesn't feel safe for anybody. And I say this for myself, but I also was speaking with some people who knew we were coming here tonight, and they were asking me to voice this concern as well. It just doesn't feel safe for anybody. So that's it. Anybody else have Jim?
First off, when I'm speaking tonight, I'm speaking as Jim Lantelmi, Planning Commissioner. I am not speaking as President of the Langston Boulevard Alliance. And my opinions may or may not reflect the Langston Boulevard Alliance when it produces its which everybody you will get will be sending out our position on these things. So that said, again, this is about me. I agree with the flexibility we have for the bicycles. I'm very concerned about having them on Langston Boulevard. The stripes, Cherrydale don't work because, as mentioned, it's twisty. Cars go way fast on Langston Boulevard, despite the speed limits. They're always over that, and they're higher than we want anyway, but we can't control that. In order to make a bicycle lane useful, it has to feel safe, and it doesn't feel safe in Cherrydale. Stripes don't work. So wherever we can have it separate, physically separated, minimum with the stanchions, but best of all is, an actual curb. That's what we should do. Unfortunately, as you've mentioned, a lot of Langston Boulevard has a very, very constrained right of way. It will take decades for us to have connectivity for protected bike lanes, which means that our priority really should be those parallel bike boulevards, where we have a Columbia Pike. Any possibility of getting those short-term, identifying them, creating them, that's probably where we have to have a priority and make sure that the plan recognizes the need for those, the priority for those, and getting those in place. That's I would recommend on this. Changing topics a little bit. One thing we did talk about transit. I want to make sure that we're really clear. We want to have honest to God transit on this corridor, which means 10-minute headways. It can't be anything more than that to have real transit. If we're going to be accommodating the additional residents on here and encouraging them to actually use the buses, they have to have real headways. I've tried using the bus on Langston Boulevard a number of times, and I've literally been able to walk to where I wanted to go before a bus came. They're just not useful. And it's pathetic when I see people with groceries waiting for the bus, and they do. People want to use it, but we don't have the headways. So that has to be in there, make it really clear that's a priority.
What you see back to back, right? There's two.
Occasionally that too, but yeah, and that's, buses.
Stopping together at the same
drives me crazy when that happens. But, and one thing we haven't touched on is parking, and I don't know whether it's considered part of transportation tonight, but I very much want to encourage that this is not a metro corridor, that the design guidelines that we have and are very successful in our metro corridors of having parking underneath and maybe above, but never on the street, never on surface and always hidden. We need to have more flexibility, especially in areas 2, 3, and 4, where it is not metro accessible, because most of the people using the commercial corridor there are coming from North Arlington, and there's no transit up there. I mean, those few art buses just aren't going to do it. So we have to have parking in order to make our retail be successful. We have to have parking that is not up against the street, because we really want to create that walkable environment. But if it's a surface in the back, we should be able to live with that. If it's above, we should be able to live with that. And if it's shielded on the ground level, the way in Boston for the Harris Teeter, the new Harris Teeter, that's acceptable too. We have to make it clear that when staff is reviewing 4.1s, that there is that flexibility on how parking is going to be done, that it can be done differently than in the metro corridors. So I think, my opinions.
Eric?
Thank you. I just like to line myself with a lot of what Jim was saying. First part about the bikes, living on the Pike, using the bike boulevard a lot. I think it is right. I think the plan kind of is trying to focus on some of those north-south parallel routes, right? And I think one of the things we've seen at Columbia Pike is it's definitely not perfect, right? There's a lot of things we'd like to see better, but I think part of why it at least works okay is because kind of take advantage of the natural conditions. A lot of those streets are effectively one ways already, which means that we have natural traffic calming. And so it's not like racing down, Langston Boulevard, right? So I think, we can take advantage of that. But I think the other key, right, is making sure that we get folks to egress off those, right? So they want to come back on the Boulevard for stuff and then go back onto, the Pike. It's, 7th, I think, and 12th Street. And so I think having that approach, which I think the plan here is trying to do that, right? I think that's going to be key for bikes. It's just not realistic to have bikes on Langston Boulevard, right? To be pushing that in the next 10 years. So.
Yeah, so my office is at the corner of Langston and Old Dominion. And of course, the people that come right off of Langston onto Old Dominion, and some of my people are walking across the street and I always go like, oh, please, please, please. But the difference is even between the Pike and obviously the corridors, Langston is one of the last bastions of where you can maintain speed and not get stopped by all these lights. So I'm guessing along as things, develop there, if there's particularly as new, say, big rental development, it would occur to me that, we're going to have to put in more new lights because that's the only way you're going to slow people down, even with a light. Still, it's a better chance that you're going to get that because right now, people can maintain speed there. And these I'm guessing, are people that use this as a thoroughfare in and out of DC and not necessarily live there as much because it's, like I said, there are spots, especially where you pointed out, where they can maintain speed and they don't have to stop. So as this develops, you're going to have to chop those places up to slow them down or right. You're going to have some major issues there.
I also wonder, one of the issues is like the lack of synchronization of the lights, right? I mean, that's what the issue is every single morning is that you're trying to push all this traffic through who are hopping off 66 or just coming from up near Falls Church and trying to get down into the city. They're hitting every single light until they hit Spout Run. And then the light cycle seems to do something a little bit differently, but they're hitting every light. By the time they're making it down there, I think they're right. I mean, there's something going on, but it's like all these things are going to need to be synchronized, right? The light cycles, the pathways,
Thank you. So first of all, staff, thanks this presentation and the document. I wasn't here last time, so I didn't get a chance to express. I think it's coming along nicely. It's well designed. To go back to Commissioner Lantelmi's comments, I think, and actually the chair's comments and concerns about vehicular traffic, right? Like the only way we're going to move away from vehicular traffic is if we have a believable public transportation system. And to that end, I think the headways of 10 minutes, I would love to see it less than that. But one of the things that I absolutely, well, it's sort of a chicken and egg problem. It's the bus shelter, right? There's all this information that you can get from staff that says, oh, well, not too many people are using this bus, little plaque. And my favorite one is on Route 50, just north of Fleet. There's like a little peninsula island and you actually see people standing there on a rainy day. It's just demeaning, right? We're just literally just devaluing these people. So I think if this plan can do so, and this is a commitment from the county, we need to have every single bus stop be sheltered so people can legitimately arrive at work dry, right? It's just not fair to ask bus riders to stand there on the rain or on the sun or whatever.
Yeah, I align myself with that.
So I think that has to be huge. The other point I wanted to ask was parking, just Commissioner Lantelmi's comment with above grade parking. I think I'm amenable to that idea as long as we have some sort of a liner. Is that what you meant to say? So I just want to clarify.
Yes,
Parking
very much so.
above grade on the rear,
Yes.
you know, and then if we could specify some sort of minimum
Precisely.
liner distance, depth so that we have that, you know, Main Street quality that we're going for. And then finally, what's the VDOT disposition on all of this conversation? Have we been keeping them up to speed? Are they amenable? Are they?
Sure, they've supported, they're on board with the recommendations that we're proposing. Obviously, you know, we have lots of disclaimers that say all of this needs to be analyzed in more detail in the future, and coordinated with them. But, you know, they've been a partner in this process since day one. They continue to be, we coordinated with them on the traffic modeling that we did, you know, when we were trying to evaluate the impacts on traffic, for the corridor, corridor wide and the adjacent neighborhoods. So they've been collaborating with us all along the way. And they've seen the cross sections.
Yeah, that's great.
Eventually we'll need more conversations.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, they own,
the roadway.
right? So we can't play ball without them. So I just want to highlight that too. Thank you.
Yeah, I just look kind of starting from the big picture is looking at the transportation assessment that was done in the preliminary concept plan. They actually had transportation going up, or the amount of traffic going up. It wasn't that much and, you know, kind of balanced with development. But I think if you're really looking at this to be Main Street and really more pedestrian and people friendly, you want traffic to go down. And certainly from a climate aspect, we want traffic to go down and people to use, you know, public transportation and other modes. So I think, you know, kind of thinking that vision of we really want to, you know, kind of provide something that reduces the amount of traffic. And particularly, I think cut through traffic loops just coming through to get to DC is, you know, and very aligned with that is it's the transportation system and, you know, kind of going along with Commissioner Sarley is 10-minute headways are kind of minimum. I'd want to see more, but the other thing is also see much more connected to also everywhere in Arlington, but also in the region. Because, you know, I live on that corridor and I can't get to Falls Church without having to get off a bus and get on another bus. And all of a sudden it's going to be too complicated to get to where I get. I will say I did take the bus today.
I'd like to associate myself with the previous comments of the commissioners as well. Another point I'd like to stress is also pedestrian safety. I went to visit the U.S. Air Force building and I was seeing people just literally, someone I was with was about to get hit with the bicyclists coming down. I know that's going to be an area for further study, but I just wanted to underscore that. The other question I have, I know that school board is voting on whether to make Nottingham a school that's going to be shut down and they're going to bus kids from different parts of Arlington County into that neighborhood. Are you guys coordinating with that and how do you foresee that's going to impact potential traffic down Langston Boulevard?
So that's a very specific sort of data point that is sort of meant to resolve or address an issue that's happening today. Mm-hmm. And so this plan has really looked at, you know, long-term or not long-term, actually in the short term up to 2035, what the potential impact in student enrollment would be with the current system that we have in place. So with the current schools, with the current capacity and all of that, it didn't really take into account any, let's say, recent plans or changes, or changes that the school board might have to address specific problems or issues today. But again, those things would be the growth would be monitored on an ongoing basis, and it would follow the same sort of cycle that they follow for addressing those changes. And so the growth will be monitored and it will be addressed accordingly. So I don't know how that helps or doesn't.
So I understand this is sort of longer range, but I'm just curious.
Take that.
Yeah.
I have a completely identical concern. I just think it's a really foolish notion that the school board has come up with. And I don't have kids in the school system any longer, obviously, so I don't have that dog in the fight. But to take a neighborhood school, which is well attended now, and turn it into essentially a commuter school on a street where 3 civilians have been killed over an 8-year period. It was, to me, just, and it is as contrary to the notion of a walkable Langston Boulevard, because it's only whatever it is, 2 or 3 blocks off of Langston Boulevard, as anything I've ever seen. So I recognize this isn't the appropriate time to talk about it, but I wanted to do that anyway.
Yes, go ahead.
Ms. Culkin, I have a question for you to put you on the spot a little bit. We've had references to the study which projects that traffic would go up. What has been the trend up to now of traffic counts on Langston Boulevard? Do you know what that is?
Yeah, happy to answer that. And I think one of the things that's really important to remember is traffic's going to go up, but it's not going to go up, on a straight line trend with the amount of development that's happening. To Commissioner Latoni's point, traffic or just trips, I want to say vehicle trips along the corridor, have trended, not every single year, but for the last 20 years, they've decreased significantly, something about 20% along the corridor. Everything is available online. If you go to VDOT's website, they track the annual average daily traffic, publish it online. And year over year on 29 and on a lot of our corridors, we've seen vehicular trips go down year over year. It's not just like 1 or 2 years, but it's been a 2-decade trend. And one of the reasons is because of the other investments that we've been making in transportation, the bus network, our bike network, making sure that people can walk to amenities with, redevelopment that happens. So while, yes, there will be more trips taken, even just in a vehicle, along the corridor compared to if the plan isn't realized, it won't be the same kind of like parallel comparison of if trips didn't continue to go down in a ratio perspective. So we may have a few more trips, and I'll say this, more vehicle trips sometimes is actually good because it keeps traffic moving slower when you have freely flow conditions and when people aren't dealing with other drivers on the road, they drive faster. So there is kind of a balance of the right amount of people that you want to be moving along a corridor at any given time too. Some of the most dangerous roads are roads at night when people don't have to consider another pedestrian on the road, another driver on the road, another cyclist on the road. So yes, over time, trips have gone down along the corridor.
Great, thank you. That's what I thought, and I want to. So that means that even with additional development, if we do nothing to the current Langston Boulevard, we've in the past carried more traffic on. So we're really not going to be making it a nightmare. So thank you.
Okay. Judge,
Yeah, just make more comments is, on the, bike lanes is, I do think the county needs to be thinking about how they want to approach that because frankly, fragmented piecemeal development of bike lanes are pretty useless. And I know the kind of off corridor lanes are designed to kind of meet some of that, but there should be some sort of thought or idea of how the county can actually develop those bike lanes and challenging, but still, kind of let's put the creative hats on and start thinking about that. Build it, kind of build towards what we want is a good way of getting that. And the other thing maybe considering is ultimately getting the speed limit down to 25 miles an hour. And it's a main street. We don't want people going fast.
okay. Seeing no further comment.
Okay.
Move on to public spaces.
Sounds good.
Oh, and Ryan has anticipated that. Thanks, Ryan.
Sure thing.
All right, so the policies for public spaces, they really focus on, number one, expanding the public space network that we currently have by achieving new privately owned public spaces with redevelopment, of course, and also by providing a variety of space types, activities, uses, and sizes that can support a diverse population, different ages, cultures, and so forth. And then lastly, expanding the network of off-street pedestrian and bicycle corridors to ensure the development includes connections to those public spaces. So we need both. They're not exclusive. Currently, there are 24 publicly owned spaces in the planning area. This is the entire planning area, so not just along the border or in the core. They all have varying degrees of accessibility and types of amenities. One thing we do know is that there are large barriers in terms of connectivity, Langston being one of them, and certainly there are gaps in connectivity that really prevent people to get to these spaces easily. So through this plan, there is a potential to achieve an additional 28 spaces, 28 privately owned public spaces in just the core area, which is the area that needs it the most. Next slide. So in all of the areas, you'll see that the plan actually shows more public spaces in the forms of greenways, parks and plazas than what was actually shown in the PCP. So in area 2, for example, the plan increased the number of parks and plazas by 4 for a total of 6. Next slide. In area 3, the plan increased the number of parks and plazas by 2, so for a total of 9. Next slide. In area 5 West, it increased it by 6, so for a total of 12. And this does include 2 RPAs. There are 2 locations that currently are designated as resource protection areas. And so we've, in the plan, designated areas around it in those particular RPAs as public spaces in the future. Next slide. In area 5 East, the plan increased the number of parks and plazas by 1 for a total of 2. And this is in addition to the greenways. We have certainly increased the number of greenways from what we had proposed in the PCP to the plan. And really, again, there are different forms of public space. They're linear public spaces, and they're really meant to connect or create spaces for bicyclists and pedestrians. So they're not for recreation and all of that, but they still add landscaping and biophilia. All right, so next slide. So the design guidelines for public realm are also intended to support the public spaces policies in the plan. They provide recommendations for designing new parks and plazas, as you see here. Next slide. As well as for existing and new greenways. If you look closely, the design guidelines actually include very specific recommendations for development along the Custis Trail. So we consider that an existing greenway. To ensure that there's, proper building frontage or setbacks, to accommodate, again, sufficient space for pedestrians, cyclists, and landscape areas, really expanding the green quality of those trails or greenways. And that's it. I think we can have discussion on that.
Okay, wonderful. Any questions, thoughts, comments on public spaces?
Yeah. Great that we have number identified, but we really need more. There's just not enough public space up and down this corridor. And I think the plan recognizes that, but there has to be some way that we can also identify where other spaces can be. Theoretically, like we do have, like, for example, we have the cell phone tower by Lee Harrison Center. That's privately owned, it's occupied, but it's still green, and it's something that theoretically could at some point be green space, park of some type. So we should be identifying all of those type of things specifically in here, that these are opportunities. They may never occur because the owners may not want to sell, but we should be aware that they're there, that, because the POPs plan does call for these like generational purchases. And we should be ready for those if they come up. So I'd like to have more emphasis on that sort of thing, because we really do need more gathering spaces. Each of the various nodes should have at least some identified public gathering place where we can have things to happen, about a farmer's market or a art thing or just look at gatherings, something like that. We have, I think you've identified at least one near where the Lee Heights is, where potentially that could happen. We should have that in each of the nodes, something like that.
Are you asking also for like an overlay between the identification in the POPs and this as well? Like
they certainly be coordinated, or at least be aware. There should always. This is just one small plan, actually, because we have our 11, 12 comprehensive plan elements that all of them will actually be feeding into this in some way or another. So there really has to be the recognition that all of those components of the comp plan will be influencing this, and this should influence those plans in turn, because they're all renewed or looked at every 5 years theoretically. So I want us to make sure we're not forgetting that that should be happening. There should be that coordination. So yes,
I think it'd be nice if there was some kind of
yeah. we don't-
delineation or
Right.
something, yeah.
I have a question. So talking about that cell tower lot there. So if these people never choose to sell, should we be thinking of some incentive or something to encourage them, since they have the space, to county-wise, some incentive to them that we could give them so that they would want to at least have the space used? Or
Certainly. And any ideas like this, we should be
so I
having
mean,
something
that
they're
should be in
acknowledging
here.
creative ways
Yes.
to have, because we're already saying public-private, so that's fine. You know, these, publicly used private spaces, well, that could be one of them. So yes, you're right, Commissioner.
We will be looking at all of those options now between now and when we put out the next draft, including, to see if there are other potential locations to add more public spaces. So
And then preserve the ones we have. I mean, we have,
yeah,
we have a representative from Leeway Overley here tonight. He's very concerned about their park.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a great little park there.
Yeah.
It's not actually that little. It's actually a pretty good sized park there.
Yeah, I mean, I would think that if I own something, and for most of us that I look at a cell tower, I go like, oh, no, the radiation, I'm gonna die, I'm getting to get away from it. But, if somebody approached me and I knew I wasn't gonna sell it, and there was some plan that I could make it more attractive and have some sort of an incentive, I'd probably think about doing it.
You can lease it.
Yeah, release it, whatever. So I
You know,
think we need to be
technology
very
changes.
creative with.
It used to be a microwave tower that went away. Now it's
Yeah.
a cell tower.
Right.
So technology changes.
Jim, thank you so much for underscoring the importance of green spaces. And actually, as you know, the community or the Lee Center is very concerned. It's actually 1.6 acres that the county owns. And I know there's, in the plan, it mentions that potentially being used for affordable housing or being used for some sort of co-location library of some sort. I would just really encourage staff to consider that for whatever's planned there for it to not exceed the current footprint, and so that we could preserve more of the green space. I think it's really critical to do that. And I know the president's here as well, and we'll be commenting and providing a more thorough overview of that. Yeah.
I want to also associate myself with Commissioner Lantomi's encouragement of us being a little bit more assertive, aggressive, enthusiastic about public spaces. And one of the things when we were working on the open spaces master plan, which I think you call POPs.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Yeah, that plan is aware of the lack of community, both park specifics, but also public spaces up there. So I think, let's err on the side of being very assertive and enthusiastic about the possibilities on this. The other thing was, I'm going to bring this up a little bit prematurely, but the notion of repurposing and reusing, is something that I really want to highlight also from the ambient sort of environmental perspective. And then finally, I did have a specific question on this issue about calculating lot areas and why we're using buildable space and not lot size. Did you understand my question? So on the definition of sort of density and open space, we're using buildable lot area. Correct me if I'm saying this correctly. And usually on the county, we use lot size. We don't exclude the setbacks to the buildable.
Because it's based on the gross lot acreage. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah,
Versus-
so it seems like we're calculating the buildable area when we're talking about open space requirements and meeting those. And I just wasn't sure if that was unintentional language or if there's some intent to exclude the setback area from open space calculations. We usually do include those, so I'm unsure about that.
I think we can go back and look at those, Commissioner Sarley. We
Okay.
were looking at, getting the sort of the public frontage, as
a certainty. And then within that, again, outside of the setbacks, you know, if you will, sort of maximum footprint such that we were getting additional open area, you know, perhaps on a property basis for the users of that site. And that may be different from some sites where we've identified space that would be more publicly accessible for the general public.
I think I understand that, but I think if you can introduce a paragraph explaining what you just said in a way that, you know, and here's where I'm coming from, right? I work with the development community, and I was reading that and I'm like, I'm a little confused as to what it is that I'm supposed to do with the property that I have on this. Do I have to not include the calculations? Like, you know what I mean? Like, we usually use setbacks as open spaces on our calculations. So that's why.
It's private open space.
Right. Now, if you want to achieve something else, right, and incentivize or penalize a certain use, absolutely, let's do it. But let's just be clear and state that intent somewhere in the document. So as I'm interpreting this to implement, you know, sort of development.
We'll take a look at it and make sure it is clear. I know that we are making some adjustments to that. But I hadn't thought of it in that way.
Okay,
So we'll look at it. Yeah.
great.
Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Okay. So Eric, Joe, and then.
Sure, I have a clarifying question. Sure. So goal number 7, part of it says ensure ground floor activation and development and use of the parks to enliven and attract users to the public space. Can you just provide some specific examples of what you might be thinking about?
So you mean, oh, yes. Well, anywhere that we're showing public spaces, we want to make sure that the ground floor has uses that actually generate pedestrian activity fronting the public space. The last thing we want is, for example, for there to be just core elevators or
Dumpsters.
utilities, dumpsters, loading areas, parking. Parking, you know, we know parking, a certain amount of parking will have to be, you know, accessible, but we want to make sure that for that percentage of the building frontage that we're recommending in each one of these street frontages is that those are actually, that space is actually activated, that it has a use that can bring ice to the street, ice to the public spaces, and generate pedestrian activity.
So we're, again, these are some maybe basic questions, but so we're envisioning, you know, in some of these areas, how that would work out from a policy perspective is we're going to possibly require that development to have that type of space, like on the ground level. So, you know, yeah, you might need like a lobby, but we would like to see a coffee shop, or we'd like to see certain types of retail. Maybe it's not even retail, but other types of public, you know, private but public uses, right, for folks to generate.
So there are two different things. There are parts of the plan in the use mix map that shows where we would like to see ground floor priority areas, you know, for retail or retail equivalent uses, and that's very specific to the type of use. But I mean, overall, in general, whether it is a retail use or not, we would still like to see frontage. So a lobby may be perfectly fine. Within, if one of the street types says, I think it's 80%, I can't remember now if it's 80% or 85%, what we're recommending for the primary or secondary street frontages, then of that 80%, we want there to be active uses. The active uses may be retail if that's what the ground floor priority areas designate. But if they're not, they can also be lobby areas or meeting rooms or things that can generate, that don't have blank walls, essentially. So there's fenestration requirements as well.
And we've done this elsewhere around the county, like out the Pike, everybody knows out on the Pike. So we've done that like along the Pike and other areas. I'm asking it because I am just thinking out loud here. I'm a little bit, I'm wondering, does this really do much for us? Because like I've seen this other places in the county, we are requiring there to be something on the ground floor, like you're talking about. I don't really see the space really activated in the way that I think we would like it to be. And so I don't have a better suggestion right now, but I don't know, like Centro is a great example that came online, George Mason and Columbia Pike. We have this, you know, private public space. It's not active at all. I've never seen anybody out there. It's a big grocery store, so people come in and out. They're not lingering. You know, it's sort of like I don't think this is a bad idea, but I'm wondering if that maybe we need to tweak it and really think about it more if the idea is to kind of create a community kind of space people might linger for 15, 20 minutes.
I think it's a little bit about safety too, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, how do you have eyes on the space? I mean, and maybe that's even residential frontages, but are there entrances that people are coming in and out of that space? So it seems like maybe it's not, it can be welcoming, but it also feels safe. And it's not turning your back, you know, backdoor uses to a public space. You know, we're trying to think about those in the sort of the public realm. So I don't know if that means that, you know, we need to go back and look at that language to be a little bit more clear.
Yeah. We'll look at it to see if there's anything.
And that's I mean, obviously that's a really good point. And maybe part of it is just tweaking the language and to say, it's not just for people to hang out, but it's people kind of coming through.
Right.
It's almost like a proactive safety measure too. We want this to be a place where people are coming and going, some linger, some don't.
And I think we can look geographically too. I mean, not every new public space is, you know, for gathering, you know, it may be for overland relief. So is that point, you know, relevant in that location, or where is the space relative to what we envision, you know, more for multifamily development versus mixed use? So we can go back and take a look at that.
Thank you.
Yeah, overall, the plan really is talking about redevelopment of a lot of places where there's actually existing open space. So that, I think in that, we may be losing more than we would be gaining by any of the proposals. And in fact, some of the data in the PCP seem to suggest that, because they bundle together rooftop gardens and other open and private space to get what looked like it was an increase in open space. But if you take that rooftop stuff, which I've got nothing against rooftop gardens, I think they're great. They also can compete with solar. So, they just shouldn't be counted as this open or planted space. And we need to be looking to see that we're actually really increasing the tree canopy. I think it's only 17% now. So, and also, get to Commissioner Sarley's point about repurposing buildings, a whole other climate issue involved in that too. But, it does tie very quickly with what's the existing tree canopy and what we're doing to protect what we have in terms of open spaces. And then we're looking at the activity hubs in particular, where it makes a lot of sense to redevelop that, because it's pretty much all those are all impervious surfaces anyway. But, what is the county setting themselves as a goal of buying back additional open spaces? I think, maybe they squeeze in a little pocket park or something like that, but they don't necessarily, is it really as much as we really would want to see getting out of that, to see much higher buildings is smaller footprint. And that might give an opportunity to put, kind of dense native plantings along the areas going towards the residential areas, which make for a nice buffer, as well as, very appealing and attractive parks for people. And the other is actually, the point is to try to design for urban heat island and making sure that, buildings as well as the landscaping in the park are really designed in order to reduce the urban effect. So I would, kind of try to avoid any areas that are almost strictly plazas. Those will be unbearable in the middle of the summer. But there's a lot of ways of pavers and that you put trees in and still have kind of semi-hardscape places. But to really think seriously that, we've got to be thinking about the urban heat island effect when we're going.
Karen and then Leah. I really appreciate your comments and would also like to associate myself with Commissioner Charlie's comments about repurposing rather than demolishing. I think the Lee Center would actually be a good example of something we could use to repurpose. I know it has asbestos and we need to make it ADA compliant, but it's something that we should certainly think about rather than demolishing. How can we envision this space and use what's already there?
Yep.
Great. I'll have a few comments. So I'm going to react a little bit and piggyback on Commissioner Berkey's comment. I think funny that you brought up the Columbia Pike George Mason for Centro. You know, I generally prefer on my urban design to have a mass on the corner and do the park internal to the block. I think, and this is the problem with Centro, you feel a little exposed, you don't feel safe. It's that primordial, you know, Savannah thing. You know, I would recommend that the plan emphasize architecture on the corners, you know, to anchor the corners and create the nodes and create that sense of like destination and rhythm. And then put the parks on between. The other thing I'll say is like parks don't have to be massive. You know, they can be fairly small and they become great neighborhood gathering centers and events like that. A la New York, tons of examples. And then, yeah, I'm going to agree with Joan. Concern and or not so much concern, but the notion of rooftop, it does detract from the eyes on the street, you know. So as much as we can focus and center and prioritize the street first, and then, you know, if they absolutely want to have a rooftop facility, sure. But I think, yeah, solar panels will be great up there. And, you know, if we put our resources, pull our resources at the street, I think it's pretty good.
You know, Centro has been brought up so much tonight. But I think Centro is a really good point because it is accessed by people who live in that space, right? Who can like, but you know, when we think about Langston Boulevard, when we think about all of our projects, I think the Planning Commission has said over and over again, how is the greater public also being able to access these spaces? Centro is a good example of other people not being able to access because it's just kind of like a drive-by on both sides, Columbia Pike and George Mason. You know, what Jim and I are kind of whispering to each other is that if you go into the parking lot, you're not going down that parking garage to be able to come out and access Centro. There's not really much there to entice you to use it. And I think, again, going back to Jim's earlier comment about how we are intentionally thinking about how people are getting to the spaces along Langston Boulevard, how we're making, Ginger's been a really good proponent, educator on this. So I will make sure that I give kudos here. Hopefully I don't say wrong thing. Like, don't ever give me credit again. But, you know, just making sure that we're able to access these points in ways that people feel comfortable accessing them. And sometimes that means rethinking the way we envision parking, as Jim was saying earlier. Did I do that okay, Jim? Did I do that? Was I okay with it? Okay. I think about that with public spaces along. Like, how are we really making sure people are getting there and feeling like they can truly enjoy the space that's being created in a meaningful way?
Only a little more on the parking, not just have parking we know it's there, but you know, like maybe public parking or a public-private sort of thing, so that I don't have the absurdity of shopping in this store on the strip of, and having to get on my car and drive 4 spaces down because you can't, you know, otherwise advanced towing takes me away because I'm not in the right store. So there has to be the ability to have the shared parking that once you park, you parked and you can walk to all the stores within like 2-block radius, maybe, you know, amazing concept. So, you know, we should have some sort of incentives that can happen, that it isn't just for this store that you park, that it has, and, you know, maybe we do need some sort of public parking. And, you know, Alexandria has that, I think Falls Church has that, you know, that can be done as part of a public-private enterprise, but somewhere that accommodates it, unlike in the metro corridors.
And it has to be affordable.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Well, they've got that little pocket park, Falls Church off of, what is that, Washington Street? They've got that tiny little pocket park, and it's really well used. And there's lots of parking that's used by everybody in those businesses, from Northside Social to Juicy, right? Anyways,
That's wrong now. That's where the Whole Foods is going.
well, everybody uses that.
Everybody uses it. I know. It's a
And there's
great.
plenty of parking.
And I've used it because I go to the restaurants there. Yeah.
Any other thoughts on public space in Arlington? Okay, great. Last topic.
Last topic, and there's only one slide for this one, mainly because obviously sustainability touches mostly on, you know, not just energy goals and all of that, but also stormwater, and those are depicted in the public spaces maps, like where they would be located. So the policies for sustainability and resilience really focus again on expanding the tree canopy coverage. We talked a little bit about that, and planting areas throughout the core. As we know, that's the area with the most impervious surfaces is in the core. Also providing green roofs as a means of expanding the pervious surfaces wherever possible, reflecting, again, biophilic design and connecting people with nature. Supporting multimodal transportation, so that, an electrification of the transport and micromobility to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Embracing the use of renewable technologies, decarbonization and energy efficiency within buildings. Enhancing resiliency through the use of clean backup power technologies. Promoting flood mitigation and protection by, again, providing additional runoff detention or overland relief corridors wherever possible along the corridor. And reducing or minimizing the impervious surface coverage that we have along the corridor. And then lastly, but not less significant, is protecting the natural surface and groundwater assets. I mean, that's absolutely important for the corridor and for the bay. So the PCP recommends very specific tree canopy targets, but these are for public parks as well as APS facilities. The staff is planning to include specific tree canopy targets for private development in the next draft of the plan. So we will be more intentional about what that is, both for commercial as well as multifamily and mixed use developments. And then in terms of stormwater mitigation, as I said, the plan recommends detention and overland relief in certain specific areas. They're usually tied to the public spaces or the locations of the public spaces, which are shown in the public spaces map. So if we need to go back to that, we can. And that's in general. I know we touched on some of the issues.
Any additional comments on sustainability and resilience, Jim?
Of course. Stormwater is probably the biggest issue for this corridor. And that's something that it isn't going to work by just having site by site be redeveloped. That's own enough, of course. But I'm so feel we need to do something more to address specifically a holistic way to deal with this, that it isn't just going to be taken care of by bit, because overland relief requires connectivity, and just having one, like for example, Washington Kirkwood, the new apartment building there has overland relief built into it. It goes right by the patios, and that's perfect. That's a great use, those patios, alternative use. But then there's nothing all the way to the river from there for overland relief. It will require redevelopment all the way up and down, which is something that isn't going to be happening in the next few years. So we have to have some sort of holistic way of, first of all, capital investment needs to be done by the county. The county has to really step up and make honest to God real serious investments for stormwater management. And that's, some of it's going to be really expensive, but some of it could be really relatively cheap if you design it right. With way more rain gardens. I mean, almost as a default, where you have a lawn now that the county has to maintain, that's a total waste. That could be a rain garden. That could be a stormwater facility right there. It's small. It's going to be only a small percentage of the amount of stormwater, but when they do a lot of them all up and down the corridor, they add up. So we should really be emphasizing that sort of thing, trying to find these little nooks and crannies that can be done for it. I mean, I could probably, if we had outside right now and walked up, then we could probably identify 5, 6, 7, 8 pretty quickly where we could do that. And yes, rain gardens require maintenance, but so do lawns. So where we have grass, you could do something different. We've already done that on Williamsburg Boulevard down the middle of the median there. We should be just almost by default. That's what DES should be doing for anything that is within its jurisdiction. So stormwater, I think, needs to have, I would like to see more of a holistic discussion of stormwater and including where the county has to step up rather than just from simply relying on private redevelopment.
And I think Demetra has her hand up to maybe respond to Jim, essentially.
Hi, is that Jim? Demetra McBride. I'm the Bureau Chief for the Office of Sustainability and Environmental Management. That includes stormwater. We deeply appreciate your focus on stormwater. I agree with your general premise. I just want to maybe just mention a couple of items with the methodologies that you raised and give some information. First and foremost, we are proposing an additional line item in the 10-year CIP update that's upcoming for that's simply for Plan Langston Boulevard. It's not meant to take the place of anything that private development will be asked to do. It's meant to supplement it and to work holistically with the developers. The other thing is that the buildings, I just want to point out that a lot of the buildings on currently along Plan Langston Boulevard corridor are older buildings, so they predate a lot of the subsequent stormwater regulation at the state level that really, made a difference. I'm not saying that it made the total difference. I'm not saying that it offered a full solution, especially in Arlington with our other constraints. But these new buildings will automatically have to come up to a much, obviously the current code, which is a vast but not total improvement over what the code was when these buildings were originally built. As far as the rain gardens, we're big fans of rain gardens, but we want to kind of really put them in the proper place for their proper, best and highest use. And if you're looking for flood mitigation, remember that rain gardens are a popular best management practice for our land disturbance activity program. And that's based on capturing and retaining 3 inches of water in a 24-hour period. You're talking about flooding, particularly in that area, in that Spout Run corridor and very specific vulnerability areas. You're talking about at least 7 inches in less than an hour. So the rain gardens, even articulated in a chain, are not going to do anything about flooding. They're going to be incredibly effective in terms of retaining runoff and in maintaining water quality, particularly in redevelopment. So I agree with you for that. I just want to put it in its proper purpose. But we look forward to working, obviously, with all of the stakeholders, with CPHD, with the developers, and hopefully with you and your continued interest and knowledge in stormwater to really meet all the expectations that you have of the county.
Great, thank you. Those are great comments. So thank you very much for those clarifications. So yeah, and I absolutely agree that anything new is going to be pretty much be better than what's there now for stormwater purposes, because it'll bring it up to current code. But we really have to be, it isn't simply the Chesapeake Bay code. It has to really go beyond that to have best practices for that property, not just simply meeting code, so that we can do everything we can to help mitigate exactly the type you're saying, when we have these ridiculous new amounts of water coming down where we don't even know what it's going to be 20 years from now, but it's not going to be any better than what it is now. It'll probably be even more severe. And it's hard to prepare for something that we know is going to be worse, but we don't know how much worse. So, yeah.
Well, I'll just add 2 quick references and a question. I don't want to be personal, but do you live in the Spout Run watershed?
Yes, I do.
Are you available Thursday night? Because we're having the Spout Run meeting, the first full meeting on Thursday. Yeah. Great. Well, we're going to give you a bunch of information then on Spout Run and kind of what we've been doing to try and, forge a kind of comprehensive, or moving towards a comprehensive response to the really acute vulnerabilities and challenges in that very large, watershed. And the other thing is the RAMP, the Risk Assessment and Management Plan. We are in the process of nearing completion on that, and it is going to be a subject of the annual CIFED meeting in November. Excellent. And that is going to give you a lot of mapping on future climate projections, inundation projections, et cetera. So hopefully you'll be able to make that as well.
Great. Yeah, those are great. And I just want to make sure our plan here will be consistent with where you're going in these additional things that are going to be announced in the coming weeks and months.
Great. Thank you. Look forward to speaking with you further.
Leo.
I'm just going to associate myself with this whole little conversation that just took place. I think that's really important. We ought to push on that. I will say that stormwater management is an element of our environmental impact. And so I think I don't want to drop the ball on some of the other issues, like really getting these buildings to be triple glazed if we can do it. One of the things that I keep harping on is reducing glazing on a lot of this architecture. A lot of those things do have a long-term benefit and will help, the stormwater management issue. But that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Jeff. First, it would be very helpful with this plan to actually have a 1-page description of what, essentially a green Main Street is. we're thinking green in the terms of environmental. Because there's just so much in there, it's not that much, but I think, and be very concrete. And basically, you know, in a large part, we're talking about buildings. And buildings are, you know, 60% of carbon emissions in the county. And the goal should be is that all buildings are highly energy efficient and they don't use fossil fuel on site. I mean, that's the essence of getting to the carbon neutrality goal. And that needs to be fairly clear that this is the goal and objective for the buildings across the corridor as well as across the county. But, you know, in all other planning that I've seen, they get really vague about referring to the CEP and broad things like carbon neutrality, but they didn't get down to the specifics. This is what it really means. And I think we need to start being more focused on really laying that out is this is what it means. And then the other issue on is the repurposing and reusing the buildings. You know, the most carbon friendly building, climate friendly building is one that's been renovated and reused rather than demolished and rebuilt, because the construction industry is a huge contributor of greenhouse gas emissions. So I think the plan should, and really again, across the county, we should be prioritizing repurposing buildings. Now I can understand, you know, you've got these areas where it's huge parking lot in a small building, you know, that makes some sense. And then we want to be looking at them, well, at least let's make sure we deconstruct and use and recycle. And then the other issue across this, and it really pertains to most of the goals and priorities we want to do is how do we actually make sure they get implemented? How do we how do we make it appealing and attractive to the developers to, you know, build to what we want? You know, we'll make it easier for you to kind of get through and do what you want. So it would, you know, incorporate stormwater, incorporate energy issues, incorporate, you know, green spaces and that, and the stormwater. So again, you know, this is, and what does the county take on? It's good to hear Demetra talking about what the county is planning on doing on stormwater, because I just think a continued reliance on developers is not necessarily going to get us to where we want to go. So kind of how this is built into the plan implementation is going to be really important.
Yeah. Regarding tree canopy, I think one area where, you know, the goal is to have more trees, but so we have a goal at the beginning, but there's not in most of the other things that we do with planning commission. There's no plan at the end that if a tree dies, it's still under this warranty or guarantee that the county says we're supposed to have. It's like you met your requirement at the time of the development, and then after that, it's just go bye-bye, cares, nobody checks on it. So how can we, if we want this to be like a model place moving forward, can we interject something like that in this plan?
Hello.
Vincent, you turned your camera on.
Oh,
Yeah, I did. And this is Vincent Frey, our forest
All of a
manager.
sudden you heard trees.
Yes. I've been here the whole time and relating to people talking about getting towed by Advanced Auto. So this is part of our current site plan conditions, which if we are redeveloping through site plan in this corridor would likely be retained, is to replace landscape and maintain landscape for the life of the site plan. Enforcement of that, of course, is difficult, but not impossible. And we do this on a regular basis where we enforce tree replacement, particularly in the streetscape, where people often assume that we maintain a tree in the streetscape when it's really maintained by an adjacent site plan. So there are mechanisms through site plan conditions and agreements and zoning enforcement to keep trees in places. Now, where that might be a little bit more difficult is if they are on roofs or inside interior plazas, which I do want to say have benefits for environmental reasons and for the people who live there. But it might be harder to see those trees and whether they are maintained. So that's something to consider.
Thank you. Anything else on this topic?
I'll just say I really appreciate the wonderful discussion about all of the environmental priorities. But I'll join Jim in saying that stormwater issues, I think, are the most important. I think from what I'm seeing, we're not doing enough yet, but we've got lots of opportunity to get better on it. Joan's statement that we can't rely on developers to do everything is quite right. But we have to do both. One of the truths behind what John was saying was that if the private sector can do it, they can do it a lot faster and a lot cheaper than government mandated programs can. Clearly, we're going to need to do both in this situation.
Demetra?
Yeah, I'll try and make this quick. I don't want to minimize. We always like it when people pay attention to things that represent the work that we do. But just as an assist to my wonderful colleague, Vincent, I wouldn't just only look at trees or green roofs. I think that, yes, flooding is a really critical climate vulnerability in Arlington for a lot of reasons that we've already gone through. But we saw it this year and we saw it around the world, and we've been seeing it for the past consecutive 5 years. Extreme heat is going to get worse. It's going to become more frequent, and the duration of those extreme heat events is going to get longer. And I was really excited when I saw a building going up right near the courthouse where they put a green facade up across the entrance on that wall. So I think we really need to get really creative and really effective about interspersing the environment with as many innovative green infrastructure elements so that you're creating an ambient, kind of control on extreme heat along that corridor. That's also going to give your urban trees a far more friendly environment to thrive in.
Thank you. I feel, go ahead, Karen.
Just the last thing, in terms of sustainability, I know Commissioners Schreiner and Guerin can't be here today, but I know they were really also concerned about the AFA building and some of the mature trees that could potentially be impacted with any redevelopment there. So I just wanted to voice that.
Thank you. I feel a little nervous asking this question. Are there any questions about built environment from last time that you didn't feel like you were able to ask or didn't get answered?
I submitted.
Open to take that.
I knew it.
I submitted something and I didn't, because we cut it off.
Yeah.
So
Did you see your answer?
No,
Okay, do you want to ask your question?
I can't remember.
Okay.
It was something about, was it about?
Probably about birds.
Huh? No, it wasn't.
I think it
I
was.
can find it.
I think it was. Leo, you want to go?
I'll find it.
Yeah.
We're gonna cut you off at 3 questions.
I only have one.
Okay,
You'll be
good.
surprised to hear. Just on the setbacks and sort of some of that building massing conversation. I'm just going to cite an example, and it's going to be a long story, so we can all settle back. And no, not too long ago, this commission recalls we did a sector update plan for Clarendon, and in that conversation, we literally asked the question, what was their intent when they asked for 20 feet setback? We literally asked the question, and we did not know why. Right? So if we're going to do setbacks, and this was my question about that 35-foot setback on the 7th floor, that's great. Let's make sure that the future commission can refer to the intent and say, okay, we can change this, or we're not going to change this because of X, right? So I think that's my biggest sort of high-level comment on the document. These like, why are we doing the specifications? My other question was about the block and the 350 feet. Like, what are we mitigating with that? Is that a super block concern? If so, do we need to put a street there, pedestrian access? I am doing 3 questions. And my third question is some of the regulations on the rear with the 6-foot iterations and things. That sounds very form-based, Cody.
On the rear,
On the rear when they're transitioning to.
adjacent to low density?
Yeah. you have these requirements to make these 6-foot setbacks or material change, right? Like, so again. from a
Well, I don't
developer-
recall that in our plan, specifically. I don't know that we have anything that specific.
I sent you my notes on that.
Okay, I'll look him up.
Yeah.
We can
and
look
I
at the
can-
other.
I can follow up with an email and find it,
Sure.
fair enough, but it was a little confusing, it was a bullet, it was talking about different materials, it had the 6-foot increment, and then it had like, or you can have like a, what was the word? What's the word when you enter into the setback? Encroachment. You can have an encroachment, a 6-foot encroachment. So again, I'm not sure, are we talking about buildable restriction lines? And so there's just some, like, what's the intent? And
I don't know
then,
that we have any of those specific things. Yeah.
I sent you, an email.
Can you forward that email again? so
Please,
That they
that
have
would
it.
help.
I will for sure.
I don't have it handy now, and I have all the comments, but that.
I sent it to you today. His
Oh,
comments.
today? Oh, no, then I haven't had a chance to read
It's,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
But
But,
I'll send it again. But it's just, so that's my big concern on the massing. There's some like very specific form-based code almost things, but then
Okay.
there's like these big sort of missing areas of conversation. So I think if you sort of clarify a little bit of what it is that we're trying to achieve with these specifics, and then, what is the big intent, big picture? And, it's sort of first principles, keep going back to the first principles as you go through stuff. Thank you.
Sure.
She found my email.
Okay, with an answer?
I don't know about an answer, but we.
Okay, well, she found it, so she can get back to you on that email.
We have
And
the
then Jim has
comments.
one final
Just
built
follow up on
environment
Leo was
question.
saying. Have the setbacks don't start until 7 stories up. Is that what we're really looking to do? Because didn't Clarendon have lower setbacks?
Setbacks start above the 7th story, but setbacks are applied by street.
Great, okay, so
there are
setback
always
is
setbacks.
different than
That's
the
the ground.
setback is
Yes.
different than the step back.
Correct.
Okay, so we will have a setback,
Every street frontage will have
thank you.
a specific
Okay,
setback.
and that is reflected in the plan.
Yes, that is
Okay,
there.
I
now.
just want to confirm that. Okay, thank you, that's all I need.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So listen, one thing we do right is we stay on time. We have a number of speakers. We are going to go with the virtual speakers first, as we explained earlier, or as I explained earlier. And then we have maybe. You going?
Maybe.
Maybe still? Okay. All right. Hey, Claire, are you still on? Can we hear your public comment? And remember, all comments are up to 2 minutes. You don't have to take all 2 minutes, but you are free to go to 2 minutes. Claire, are you still there?
*6.
Yeah, if you're on the phone, you just gotta hit *6.
This is Claire. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Okay,
Okay,
we're starting
thank
the
you.
clock now. Thank you.
Okay. I'll be very short since you're giving me the option. Again, I'm Claire Jacobson. I'm a Lion Village resident. My property and my house back onto Kirkwood, and I'm very close to the intersection there of Kirkwood, Langston, and Spout Run. My comment is twofold. First of all, I wish to continue to reiterate, register my opposition to building density and building height. I think we are, especially in that intersection there, the Lions Village shopping center area, I think that the density, but also the building height gives me a lot of concern, and I'm opposed to certain building heights. So I want to continue to register my opposition to the building height of 12, 14, 15 stories. That is way too high in my opinion, and I oppose anything over. Ideally, I would like to see on the on my side there, Walgreens, the restaurant. I wanted to see no more than stories, but obviously this is probably not going to happen, and I deplore that. Also, in terms of there was some discussion on green spaces. The land right below my house is sort of, I would like to see that set aside for wildlife habitat, and I hope that will be the case. We have a lot of wildlife here coming through the culvert, And we really need to keep that space from the apartment buildings and my house and hugging the Kirkwood Ridge. We need to keep all that for wildlife habitat and not convert that in green space or a park. Same thing
Thank
to
you so
somebody
much.
across the street.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank
Alice
you.
Hogan? Do we have Alice
Thank you.
Hogan? Alice, are you still with us?
Yes, good evening. I'm sorry, I couldn't get off mute. Thank you for having me. I just wanted to, I'm a housing consultant with the Alliance for Housing Solutions, and I'm also a lifelong resident of Arlington. So I'm speaking about housing, which I know is not your topic this evening, but I just wanted to reiterate that, I think many people looking at this really want to affirm the vision of a green and inclusive corridor that's being proposed. So I want to thank staff for your hard work. And in order for it to be, that inclusive corridor, we do need to make sure that there's the maximum amount of housing built to best utilize this corridor. And among those housing units, of course, we are seeking as many affordable units as possible as that need continues to grow. And I think if we think about Arlington, 5 miles away from the, one of the most powerful cities on the planet, to think that we have, this low density within that range, just in terms of zoning and development and green, focusing on green building where we try to maximize where we've already got infrastructure, then it makes perfect sense to try to utilize the air that we have this close to our nation's capital. So I affirm the heights that are there. I ask you to leave them there. I think it's most important that we integrate into this plan maximum flexibility if people are going to be building affordable units, whether that's co-location, lot consolidation, all the things we've talked about. And most of all, I think we need a commitment to really look back at East Falls Church and at Cherrydale and try hard to immediately after this plan, bring those two plans into kind of compliance or dialogue with this corridor plan so that it's much more cohesive. So thank you for all you're doing. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much. William Barrett? Are you with us, William?
Yes. Thank you, and thanks to the staff and Ginger at the Alliance for providing some helpful information. I'm along this process. I'm a parent of a student at Rivendell School, and I'm leading a working group of parents and Rivendell Board of Trustees members on Langston Boulevard planning. So I refer you to the letter that our head of school sent, and unfortunately, I think the staff may have missed the second page of the letter, so it wasn't included in the materials for this meeting. So if you don't mind forwarding that to the committee later on. Our biggest concern is with the Lee Center, and any reduction in the public open space would be a major negative for our school. Rivendell's not it's not an elite private school. We don't, have any options other than the Lee Center open space for recess. And we have an agreement with the county where we get to use that space for recess, and the county youth basketball teams get to use our gym. So we're very concerned that the Lee Center could be developed in a way that would reduce the open space. We're also concerned that if there were a large apartment building put in there, that it would create traffic problems, parking problems, and also pedestrian safety problems because our students have to cross the street to go there. We're also sort of bewildered, that there was an idea to put a stormwater detention facility in at the Lee Center since it's at the top of the hill. So it seems like you'd have to pump water uphill. I know. And finally, on the bicycle lanes, we're just concerned that we don't have any plans to redevelop in the foreseeable future, but we want to make sure we're not going to be kind of forced in a use permit situation to give an easement for bicycle lanes, because that would reduce our green space even further. And we also, there's a very specific thing with some parcels behind our property that we hope you can address. That's in the comment letter. I'll let you read that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, Robert?
Yes.
Robert, okay.
Robert's right here. Yeah, I'm with Leeway Overlay Civic Association. Our families lived there for well over 50 years. And when we first got there, we found that our we were able to have community co-op with our children very young at that point. And they were at the Lee Center. And what we've discovered within the community is that there's just a storied history about that block. And a lot of it because of the initial Lee School, but then all the activities that are taking place there and have taken place there as the usage of that property has changed. But the athletic aspect of the property, the large trees in the property are things that are really critical in this part of the county in terms of our area. You know, you look at Long Bridge Park, wonderful area for activities, a long, long way from Leeway Overlay. And so it's the only actually small park we have in our civic association. There's a private club that's there, but that's again a private club. And we anticipate there's going to be over time a huge increase in the number of residents along Langston Boulevard in that area, particularly from Harrison Street up. And so the idea of possibly giving up that property, it just seems totally incredible to me. I don't have any particular concerns about the Lee Highway or the Lee Center coming down. It's an ancient building, basically back into the 20s. So being able to have that building come down and have more activity spaces for both the trees and other, we have a butterfly garden there and all. It's just going to be so valuable for the community as a whole when that happens. So we would like to see it. I would like to see it as a whole block that is really used by particularly younger people.
Thank you so much. Hey, Jean.
William and Ron have taken over a lot of my comments, but I thank you for the opportunity to speak. There were a lot of comments made tonight that I'd like to say apply to the Lee Community Center in the park, and Jim and Karen particularly. Thank you for your comments. Renovate and reuse a lower environmental impact than tearing down and building a new building. Repurpose and reuse, protect natural services, protect the tree canopy, preserve what we have, expand public spaces, and purchase private. Repeat what William and Robert said, it's absolutely essential to keep that park and to not lose a single square foot to any new building. The old community center building is a beautiful old building. If it would be replaced, we don't want any additional footprint, period. And if that is considered, we want a financial evaluation with input from the community so that we can give our opinion. We don't appreciate the county tearing it down and also letting it deteriorate. The county has controlled that building for over 30 years. It was closed as a school in 71. It may be 50 years. So it might be less expensive to renovate it than to tear it down. Ideally, having it, or tear it down and have a park. We do not want a public-private development there with housing. If it takes up half of the block, that would take up a lot of the block. We have a baseball diamond, basketball court, playground, a lot, and some other things there. Butterfly garden. Thank you, William. I also have the Rivendell letter, and it supports this too. So save the park, don't lose a square foot of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Ginger.
Oh, well, thanks, everyone. I don't actually have a lot to say. I think the discussion was really exactly on point. I want to thank all the planning commissioners tonight. Agree with pretty much everything Thomas said. Just to highlight a couple of things, we would like to see a parking plan. So that would create centralized, publicly accessible parking that was planned in advance and enough volume so that it makes sense here. We'd like to see the 10-minute headways. We want real transit. There is going to be a lot more residents who want to use the bus, so we should have more consistent bus service. I hadn't thought about it, but I really appreciate the bus shelter comment. So we have that as well. And I wanted to follow up on the expansion of green space The county already has a process. It's identified in POPs for land acquisition. And generally it focuses on expanding existing parks. So we definitely through this planning effort to look at all of the existing parks and see if there are opportunities to be included in the public spaces master plan and identifying public park acquisition there. And then also the ones in the generation. So not just in the corridor, but if we could take a look. I know that it looks like East Falls Church in Cherrydale, that's happened. Take another look, like properties like Lee Elementary, there's 2 acres adjacent to an elementary school. We're gonna have a lot more kids, then maybe that might be a good place. And I wanted to actually shout out to Sid Ed and for all the work they did. Stormwater, the meeting on Thursday night is, from what I heard tonight, we're having a line item in the CIP for Langston Boulevard. That is excellent news. So thank you. Yeah, I look forward to the meeting on Thursday night.
Thank you. All right. Gotta choose, yes or no?
I'll go.
You'll go? Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay, I just want to stress the urgency of remediating climate change, public investment in stormwater management, not putting it on the backs of developers. Public investment is in transit. There will be a lot of affordable housing units here. Many of these people need transit. Private investment in building energy conservation, noting that affordable housing to reach the goal of 2,500 units, that's CAFs plus marks, and we should have some sort of strategy and plan for conserving marks so that these people are not displaced. Open space, public investment, not only private, publicly accessible space, which is what the plan shows now. Community facilities, 9,000 plus new residents need at least 3 community centers. The Gray House for Black Heritage is a wonderful idea, perhaps a new library and the arts. And lastly, building heights, putting now my hat on of Beverly Hills. We hope that areas 2 and 3, that building height from Lexington to Woodstock does not exceed 7 stories, as was in the most of the PCP. We do, of course, support 10 stories on Taylor at the Horizon site so that we can get that road through from Cherry Hill Road to Langston.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, listen, that concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you to each and every one of you for all of your input. Thank you so much for staff who always puts all these meetings together so successfully. Thank you all. Have a great night. Thank you.